beings called to make some noise. So here's where I'm starting, y'all. If you went to Belly Up last night, make some noise. If you got down with the Trombone Shorty Badass Alumni Band, make some noise. If you caught the vibe from Primera Linea, go ahead and make some noise. If you were someone who stayed on the dance floor from the beginning to the end, I want to hear you. If you woke up this morning feeling like you stayed on the dance floor from the beginning to the end, can I hear that too? Okay, all right. So for those of you who were there with us and felt it in your bodies, I want to honor you with this quote from Alice Walker, which is, though we have all encountered our share of grief and troubles, we can still hold the line of beauty, form, and beat. No small accomplishment in a world as challenging as this one. Hard times require furious dancing, and each of us is proof. Thank y'all for being the proof, because last night is what healing feels like. Last night is what healing looks like. And last night is what healing sounds like. So thank you for coming out to experience community on the dance floor. So I have the honor and privilege now of kicking off our narrative change plenary, and we're going to have a really, really good conversation. But I actually want to start by connecting some dots between the conversations that we had yesterday morning and some of the conversations that will continue throughout our time together today. So the first thing that feels really important to make sure everybody knows, but particularly if this is your first time here with the Aspen Forum family, our vision is for all young people in all communities to thrive. Full stop. Full stop. And at the same time, the exchange between James and Ian illuminated the fact that the majority of youth within our network are not only youth of color, but because they are youth of color in the historically disinvested communities they live in, they have also experienced intergenerational connection. And because context matters for our collaboratives, they focus on these young people, many of them using the John Powell targeted universalism approach. And so for those of you who may not be familiar, just so that you know, what John Powell has taught our network now many times is to set universal goals in your community for all of your young people to thrive. A good example might be third grade reading levels. But then targeting your strategies because you're thinking about the particular needs of different groups of young people and their lived experiences. Another leader in our network, Angela Glover Blackwell, her take on this, we sometimes call the curb cut effect. And it's the idea that when you prioritize a group and you focus on meeting their needs, it benefits everyone. And this specifically came out of Michigan in the 40s and Berkeley in the 60s, and it was advocacy work specifically to support accessibilities for a person with disabilities by cutting the sidewalk, cutting the curbs. And again, that idea that by doing that, many more people are able to access the street and the sidewalk. So please hear me say, it's so important to be clear that our work and our vision is for all young people and all children. You know, we are also people who have studied James Baldwin and believe these all are our children. We will either profit from or pay from what they all become. And I say that to say so our communities are also at the same time targeting strategies in order to meet the needs of our most vulnerable young people in ways that also benefit the all. The second thing I want to make sure you know, particularly if it's your first time with us, is that leaders like John Powell, Angela Glover Blackwell, Michael McAfee, Dr. Sean Ginwright, Amanda Tashini, Dr. Anthony Burrows, there are so many leaders who have been with us, been with our communities, been with our young adult partners, helping us on this learning journey, and really spending time supporting how communities hold this very the particularity of place, while making those universal connections that help us keep learning at the national level. And it's really important that that work of national partners, young people, communities coming together has really informed our learning journey over the past 12 years. The next thing that I want to pick up on was the synergistic exchange between Ian and James about the shared history between indigenous communities and Black communities and communities of historical disinvestment. So this idea has inspired our learning agenda for 2026, which is really to pull the aperture back to bring our healing to the root of our repair work across our network. What does this look like? In May, we're going as a network to visit the legacy sites in Montgomery, Alabama. Raise your hand if you've been to the legacy sites. I love this, I love this, I love this. And let me be really clear, there's really two parts to that. The first, in and of itself, substantively, is visiting the museum, the many different parts that comprise the legacy sites. And then the second part, equally substantive, is a conversation our network is going to have with Bryan Stevenson, the so what of that. And as you all know, that work is rooted not only in truth-telling, but in the relationship between truth-telling, narratives, changing laws, and policies in ways that help inform how we get to a democracy that works for everyone. But we're not going to stop there. In October, we're going to Hawaii. And that trip for our network in Hawaii is about healing from the history of colonization with practices rooted in indigenous culture, ancestral intelligence, y'all. And let me be clear, we will still continue to be all about pathways, all about systems. One of the things we're going to explore specifically in Hawaii is the way that they have used indigenous culture to literally end the number of young women in prison with a bigger vision for just ending youth prison. So I say, yeah, show them some love. Some great work has happened in Hawaii. But we are a healing network. We are a network rooted in repair, and we just want to pull the aperture back to get to the root of that in ways that help inform how we approach our narrative work, in ways that inform how we approach our systems change work, and the ways that we continue to support freedom dreaming, young people, communities, national leaders, all of us together. And then finally, Toshi Amaya closed us with the beautiful reminder of the intergenerational transformative power of the arts, which is what we've been hearing from our young adult partners across our network of communities. And so I want to make sure what you all know, in case you haven't had a chance to hear about it, is that we are deepening our commitment to pathways that foster creative youth development. So think about the magic of the Trombone Surety Youth Alumni Band. Think about the magic of Primera Linea. These are just some ideas of the expansiveness we're holding in our minds and hearts as we invest in pathways that meet young creatives where they are and support their dreams to come alive. And for those of you who heard me, I probably can't say it enough. I've been studying the theologian Howard Thurman, and it stays in my heart that he says, you should not ask young people what the world needs. Ask young people what makes them come alive, because what the world needs is for young people to come alive. That's at the heart of what we're supporting here at the forum, and it's very much at the center of how we're thinking about building out our creative youth development pathways. So yeah, that's just a little bit about some of what came up yesterday, and I wanted to do some real specific grounding so that all of us have, as best as possible, a shared understanding, not just of our learning journey, but some of the leaders, thinkers, and shapers of how we got to where we are today. So now, on to narrative change. My colleague, my beloved colleague, Rashida, yesterday shared that our program, the Aspen Forum fam, had an opportunity in January as a team to visit the Legacy Museum. And maybe more importantly, we had an opportunity as a team to sit down with Bryan Stevenson. And for those of you who know and understand the civil rights leader that he is, it's hard to even sum up in a sentence or two what Bryan shared with us. But I will say this, and it lives at the heart of the conversation that we will have today. He started his opening with us was that the North won the Civil War, but lost the narrative war. And that loss is still playing out today. So, given our goals, which again is a democracy that works for everyone, thriving communities that work for everyone, and thriving young people, all of our young people thriving, the transformation we are seeking requires us to further organize and deepen our community power building work. That map I showed you all yesterday, our updated theory of action, our work has always been undergirded by 3 core values: community power building, equity, and youth voice. But that community power building piece will be even more integral to our relationship and work rooted in narrative change. And that is so that we can collectively transform the culture by harnessing our cultural power and engage in advocacy that changes policies, laws, institutions, systems, and narratives. And in order to do these things, which I recognize we all know are easier said than done, we as a network are required to deepen our focus on the stories we tell. Nat Kendall-Taylor is going to remind us that that's just as important as the frames we use to tell our stories. We must also focus on shifting mindsets and ultimately align our narratives with work, our policy and advocacy work, in order to achieve our mission. Now, here's what's also important to name. We clearly have our work cut out for us. Cultural strategy and narrative change work is not only easy, we recognize that sometimes, and for some of our issues, it can take several generations to achieve the mindset and cultural shifts that are necessary. And to be honest, we are living through a shift oriented toward radical othering, which right now means that the tide feels like it is particularly against us. But listen, y'all, I'm here with some good news. I got some good news. Yeah, I'm gonna tell it. We are not starting from zero. We've already achieved shifts in language. For example, moving from disconnected youth to opportunity youth. You go places now and other people are using this language and you're like, oh, okay. I don't even have to tell you the definition because everybody in community is using it, right? We've also seen a shift from youth and communities as a recipient of services to experts, or as Jamil likes to say, solutionaries, or as Brian Stevenson calls them, proximate leaders. But the idea is recognizing the cultural, intellectual wealth and breadth of the people who are most impacted as the experts and designers of solutions. That is a shift that the field has seen. Also, the narrative on disconnection writ large for young people has shifted from young people being disconnected to being very clear that it's the systems that are meant to serve young people that are disconnected. A young person will tell you quickly, I'm connected to my peers. Did we not just hear Maya talk about the interconnection? Yes, exactly, of her generation. And finally, and we're going to get into this as part of the plenary, there's already some convergence on narrative and messaging, specifically in the OY movement. And we are going to leverage that because, as Steve Patrick likes to remind us, we are leverageaholics, right, Stevie P? That's right, that's who we are. So that's what we're going to do. So with this background and frame in mind, I want to introduce Laura, who's going to kick us off with a keynote address. But here's what I want you to know, particularly if you're with us for the first time. This address and this conversation here today, it builds on the really, really important work that Nance Harrison has done with us in the past, and Nat Kendall-Taylor at Frameworks Institute has done with us, and so many communities around the room and national partners. And then the other thing, because we've been talking about our strategic plan and the work that we've done with FSG, narrative change is one of the core pillars that we are focusing on to drive the transformations that we are seeking. And so hear me say, we are going deep on this together, y'all. And there's two sides to that vision. The first is how we partner with youth in our communities to design a narrative change agenda. That's going to be co-created by all of us. And building the capacity of our communities, our partners, our young people to be agents of narrative change. And so it is both of those parts and pieces that we will be bridging together to accomplish our vision for narrative change. With this context and background in mind, I now have the honor of introducing Laura, who is the founder and principal of Gusto Partners, LLC. She was formerly the director of narrative change at PolicyLink, and she believes in harnessing the power of communities we serve by placing them at the center of their customers' content development and storytelling. I'll add, from my personal perspective, that Laura brings a vast depth of knowledge on narrative change and strategy, yes, to our learning needs. while showing up with honesty and thoughtfulness and abiding commitment to relationship building. It's my honor to welcome you on stage, Laura.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, all right. I was hoping that I'd get a good response. So, I'm honored to be here with you all. Movement leaders, youth leaders, and dreamers, system thinkers, shaping a future that our ancestors imagined and that our descendants deserve. This plenary asks us to hold two questions. What are we dismantling, and what are we building in its place? I come to you to this work with you as a storyteller and strategist, someone who helps movements and institutions understand the power of story to shape what we believe is possible. I had the opportunity to support the work of Opportunity Youth over the course of my career as a program officer overseeing a youth development portfolio, serving as a board chair for workforce development in the city of Detroit, and serving as executive director of the Ruth Ellis Center, which provided a safe space and housing to runaway and homeless LGBTQ youth in Detroit, Michigan. And I hold two simple beliefs. One, beauty and joy are transformative tools, components of a universal language that helps us imagine the liberated world we all deserve. And second, I believe people can change. Who you are today is not who you might be tomorrow. Well, actually, there's a third belief too. The third of which is I'm wise enough to know my 20-year-old daughter, Cameron, like many of the young people in this room, is smarter, more creative, undone with the world around us, far cooler, and I could go on than I will ever be. And I'm so excited for the world she and you will insist on building. Young people have always been at the forefront of narrative transformation. Take a moment with me, think of Darnella Frazier, who at just 17 years of age recorded the murder of George Floyd. Her decision to stay, to film, to make sure the truth could not be erased became a catalyst for a global movement. Her act of courage forced the world to see what so many had long known, that injustice thrives in the absence of a witness. Or think of climate leaders, Alexandria, Jamie, Isra, and Vic, who stood beside Greta Thunberg and declared, our futures are non-negotiable. Their insistence that survival is a right, not a privilege, has shaped public discourse. These young leaders shifted the narratives of freedom, climate chaos, democracy, bodily autonomy, and the right to breathe. They redefined what courage looks like, what leadership looks like, and what's possible when we stop waiting for permission to act. Because narrative change doesn't start in institutions, it starts with the imagination. It begins when someone refuses to accept the dominant story and tells the truth out loud. It's Afrofuturism. It was at the Ruth Ellis Center that I truly began to understand what it means to listen. Young people, Frank, Dewan, Christina, Raquel, Shelley, told me something that changed everything. They said they wanted relationships with their parents, the same parents who had kicked them out of their homes, the same parents who weren't supportive of them. The truth that they told us required us to change the entire way that we operated. We had been found as an organization that rescued queer youth, but that's not what they weren't asking me for rescue. They were asking for reconnection. They were asking for healing. They were asking for a depth of love that I didn't even understand at the time. They called us into redesigning our services to engage parents on their behalf and to create space for reconciliation, not rescue. What they really taught us was how to open doors and step aside so that young people could tell their own stories and shape their own narratives. In response, with the support of the state of Michigan, we partnered with Dr. Caitlin Ryan to bring the Family Acceptance Project and queer-centered therapy to Michigan and to the Ruth Ellis Center, marking a shift from crisis intervention to healing, connection, and long-term family restoration. And that shift from rescue to relationship is what taught me that listening to youth is not symbolic, it's strategic. At the Ruth Ellis Center, I learned that listening is infrastructure. Listening builds trust, belonging, and power. My young people's stories were the building blocks of narratives, and narrative is the architecture of change. When we listen deeply, we don't just hear the harm that must be dismantled. We hear the visions of freedoms that young people are already building. And so I return to the question, tweaked a bit, that frames our time together. How do we dismantle, And what should we build for a just future? I'm going to ground us in a few definitions for our time together. I'll be primarily sharing tools from my just rock star colleagues that I fangirl out about, from the Butterfly Lab for Immigrant Narrative Strategies. I'll also be sharing examples from Radcoms, who built a 21st century social movement, and Frameshift, whose leader, Annette, you will hear from a bit later. I'll also share from PolicyLink, where I served as the Director of Narrative Strategies. So this definition of narrative, which is my absolute favorite, was a result of working with 50 housing organizers and advocates across this country. So narratives are the big stories we tell ourselves about the world. By repeating the right narratives, you can create a new tipping point of public consciousness and create the conditions to advance your agenda and broaden your base. From frameworks, narratives are templates. Stories are the tellings. That is, narratives are recurring patterns that cut across stories and tie them together. Stories are tales about particular events and people. Both narrative and stories have familiar features like characters, plot, setting, and a point of view. Both narratives and stories feed each other. Particular stories draw from overarching narratives, and the pattern in narratives can only exist because of the many stories that embody them. Narratives operate at the level of worldview and meaning making, which means they help us understand why we believe what we do, why we behave the way we do, and why and how we can change. There are two approaches to narrative that I spend the majority of my career on, something we call narrative resilience and narrative interruption. Narrative resilience is our ability to hold on to and keep telling the stories that help us survive, heal, and move forward, even when those stories are challenged, erased, or distorted. Narrative resistance shows up when a movement refuses to let harmful labels define them and instead tells a fuller truth. Think with me of the trans activists who keep living, thriving, and shining in this moment. Narrative interruption happens when someone or something stops a harmful, one-sided story and offers a new one that's more truthful and liberating. It's like hitting the pause on a broken record, or what I refer to as my nah moment, when in my head I say, nah, you know that ain't right. And held within the brilliance of this room, as Monique already pointed out to us, are folks who have shifted the ways our ecosystem tells stories. You've moved from disconnected youth to opportunity youth, which embodies narrative resilience and interruption. The philosopher Nietzsche famously said about narratives, "There's no such thing as fact. For facts to exist, you must introduce meaning." And as another philosopher and modern day cultural strategy said,
Correct.
Absolutely.
How do you know that?
I mean, look.
Correct.
we absolutely have receipts for our facts. You can see them with your own eyes and meaning is clear. An analogy of the night sky helps us tie together the three prongs of story-based strategy: narrative strategy and cultural strategy. It goes like this. A single story is a star, bright, magnetic, intuitive. A narrative is a constellation, a pattern of many stars that together create meaning. Narratives tell us what to believe, how to feel, and how to act. And culture is the galaxy, the vast expansive where countless narratives interact, clash, and evolve. Cultural strategy is the practice of aligning artistic and cultural work with social and political goals to shift how people feel, think, and act in the world. It recognizes that culture, not policy or politics, is where people form their deepest beliefs about what is right, what is fair, and what is possible. Cultural strategy is how movements make meaning before they make policy. It's how people move towards justice by changing not just what they know, but what they feel is possible. The Love Wins movement during the fight for marriage equality wasn't only a legal campaign, it was a cultural strategy that evolved with a narrative strategy. Artists, faith leaders, and storytellers reshaped public imagination about love, family, justice, making what seemed radical feel natural, even inevitable. No human is illegal. Migration is beautiful. Black Lives Matter. Beyonce plus country music plus lemonade. These are all cultural strategy. These examples change the galaxy, the culture, the constellation, the narratives, the stars, the stories. Narrative and cultural strategies work with the raw materials of meaning making, our norms, our values, belief systems, and mental models that influence how we imagine, perceive, and behave. Together, narrative and cultural strategy are power. And these strategies fundamentally shift something called the Overton window. The Overton window, originally proposed by the policy analyst John Overton, the Mackinac Policy Institute in Michigan, shows the range of ideas that considered are acceptable in public discourse. Policy lives outside that window, but the culture defines its frame. So the work of narrative and cultural strategy is to push out that frame, so that ideas once deemed unthinkable can enter the mainstream and be recognized as not only possible, but necessary. This is the foundation of narrative and cultural strategy, to create the cultural conditions where new policies, new possibilities can take root and thrive. Two ones to think of. First, example, the fight for 15, right? Where folks fought for a minimum wage of $15. That was originally led by fast food workers. And folks at first said, oh, that's outrageous, that'll kill McDonald's business, that's not gonna happen, all those things. So it moved from what was considered radical and unthinkable until the Overton window. Another example, Medicare for all. It was in 2017 that Bernie Sanders said Medicare for all. People were like, that's loony, not gonna happen, what is he talking about? It wasn't until 2022 that his colleagues actually echoed what he had said. And today, healthcare is a litmus test for politics in this country. I'm going to bring us back to the key question of this panel. What are we building in its place? The just future I called about in my addendum to the question. As a network, where can we begin? This next part is directed at system leaders and providers in the room. In order to build a new narrative, we need a narrative system. The Butterfly Lab defines a narrative system as a set of aligned, deep narratives that provide a destination for narrative work across campaigns, communications, and cultural strategies. This systems helps us to find alignment, connect our work to other movements, and chart direction. We need to shift our system change efforts with narrative and cultural strategies while moving alongside our brilliant opportunity youth. We need to keep listening deeply and consistently to opportunity youth. We need to know when to open the door and when to step aside and let them lead. We know that those who are closest to the challenges are closest to the solutions. We need to make room for their stories to lead, invest in their power, and ensure they have the resources and narrative infrastructure to tell the stories that only they can. As a mandate for a radical communicator in Liberated Stories from Radcoms, and I'm paraphrasing, it says, it's about listening to people more than it is about changing them. Listening so that we can understand where the pain and the possibility live. We need a narrative system to do this. I hate this slide, but I did put it in. We're super familiar with narrative systems of the status quo. Don't fall for them. Learn how to recognize when they creep in and flip them. Center yourself in abundance. Offer a Black gaze. Center collectivism and belonging. Across the Opportunity Youth Network, you can catalyze and organize and line your narrative system by identifying the deep narratives essential to the world you want to create alongside Opportunity Youth. This is crucial because all humans reject a story of the future in which they can't see themselves. So, for example, when I led the Housing Justice Narrative Collaboration, we started by asking ourselves to imagine a housing future. How does everyone in America have a safe, affordable home? Then we identified a narrative system which we called a story platform that mapped the core narratives that most powerfully created an emotional connection with the audience being addressed by the campaign. This is critical because I said before that emotional connection is what produces the greatest and longest lasting power to spur engagement, action, and change. The narrative system we co-designed was singular. It outlived any one campaign. It differentiated housing justice as unique for our base and persuadables, and it contained the authentic truth of housing and justice. Narrative systems work best when activated. So this is actually, let me back up. this is actually a picture of the story platform that we created, which is very much counter to those status quo, don't fall for the traps. This is what I want you to lean into instead. Safety and privacy and freedom, joy, love, and love as a verb. Narrative systems work best when activated through cross-sector narrative ecosystems, a broad coalition of change makers and meaning makers, from journalists and researchers to artists and poets, to Maya, to policymakers, and more. Lastly, as we build our just future for our opportunity youth, we must activate a narrative system with all our partners, the ones we already know, the ones we know we have to connect with in all of our ecosystem. We must all move towards a shared collective impact and a common set of narrative and cultural goals. I'll end with this. We are living in profound times. Join me. Lean into narrative and cultural strategy. It's what we need in this moment for dismantling and building. Narrative and cultural strategy expand our collective capacity to imagine, and imagination is a discipline of freedom. We have receipts. We may not have been in this exact moment before, but we, like our ancestors, imagined more, different, and better. And as we continue this work, we breathe new life into what's possible. In this moment, in the world, it's gonna be hard. We will grieve. And as Flozell Daniels Jr., CEO of the Mary Reynolds Babcock Foundation that funds racial equity in Southern states, reminds me, we know how to do hard, and grief has always been and will always be part of our liberation. And to be the ones who keep breathing in the unknown is a brave and miraculous thing. Keep breathing. Thank you.
All right, please join me in thanking Laura again. I can't help it, y'all. You know, I just want to, just two things I want to say before I introduce our esteemed panelists. The first is that I'm not even sure if the people who are OGs in the network remember, but we did have Jeff Chang come and do this sort of foundational building blocks of narrative change many years ago. So I just have to give the shout out to Jeff Chang on the screen. I loved seeing him there. And then yesterday, it was James who reminded us of the power specifically of the art of Kehinde Wiley. And so it was just so beautiful that with the synergy, again, and the levels of connections between these conversations we're having. So here's where I want to start. What I want to start with, so thank you, Laura. I want to start with introducing these panelists, but I'm not doing bios because the bios are in the app. I just want to give you a sense of the flavor of who's on the stage and how that undergirds the conversation that we came here to have this morning. So directly to my left is the president and CEO of Frameworks Institute, Nat Kendall Taylor. I really want to say that Nat needs no introduction, but what I want to make sure you all know, in case you don't know Nat or the work of Frameworks Institute, is that Nat in Frameworks Institute is not only, I would say, like, you know, deep expertise around narratives and key messaging, but also has done meaningful messaging specific to opportunity youth. And so communities, national partners across the field, so many of us in the movement work with Frameworks Institute to help us not just make meaning of how we're thinking about our narrative work, but to connect the dots and aggregate the sort of sum total of our efforts around our narrative change work. And then personally, Nat is just a wonderful human being. And so, like, you know, like, it's just fun to talk to him. Like, he's a dad and just has this really vibrant life. So, Nat, thank you for being here with us. And then we had the honor and privilege of being connected with Madison, who is a storyteller and grief doula and really describes her work as really being present in all of life's transitions, through our beloved colleague Geneva, who met her during Aspen Health here over the summer. And it just was such an instant and deep connection. When we get to Madison, we'll talk specifically about the why, having her here now, although maybe intuitively it also just makes sense. But it's really an honor to have Madison on this panel and her expertise around the relationship specifically between narratives and healing. Madison, thank you for being here with us. And then listen, I gotta give Eugene a shout out, y'all, and in a second I'm gonna ask you to express all this love to him, because I need to tell y'all what had happened. This is what had happened. We had this outstanding young woman who works with one of our national partners who does a lot of advocacy work, and she was all set to join us, and then because some things happened, you know, life was lifing, unfortunately she couldn't be here. And then, I mean, in real time, like yesterday, we were like, Eugene, what are you doing tomorrow morning? And look, y'all, Eugene is here. Show him some love, please. He's the expert. He is the expert and is going to connect the dots for us around the relationship between policy and advocacy and narrative change with the work that he leads for the Texas Network of Youth Services. And also, we have the honor of partnering with him on our Funder Leadership Council. And so he was one of the young adults that helped to shape the learning agenda that you all are here as a part of today. Yeah, show him some extra love. And then it feels very easy to say, Laura, you already know, because she just walked us through her deep wisdom and expertise. But I will also say this, she's holding so much for us at the same time, because she spent time with our site leads. She also led a breakout. She's also, with Nantar Sin, doing a lot of work with our team at Aspen to help us build our internal capacity and knowledge. So I say that to say there are many levels and depths to how she's partnering with us. And then she shows up today so effortlessly. So thank you, Laura, for being here with us. So now, and we're going to start with whoever wants to kick us off. I really want to invite, this is just sort of sitting with you in an urgent way, what really resonated with you as Laura did her grounding in narrative change and narrative systems and cultural power? And I would love to, if you felt moved to do so, to not only share what's sitting with you, but maybe connect the dots in your work.
Well, what just happened, the whole presentation is really beautiful. You know, when it comes to narrative change and cultural value, it's really important that intermix, because without stories and cultural, things that go around, we can't really piece together what people are going through as well. You know, for instance, in my situation, being in Dallas, Texas, the culture is different compared to different parts of Texas as well. Just bringing pieces together of like what's happening in Dallas as well as what's going on with the OY and how we can change the youth and provide and go forward with our situations. So I think it's really important that the narratives and the stories that we need to bring about is really important to one together and to each other, because it kind of has a collaboration effect of what we both experience and how we can go forward towards one and create a better OY or just youth in general so we can just go forward.
The words that you use, Laura, about insisting on our future, concentration, dedication, are really stand out to me, because we have to be so devoted, and we all come from lineages of immense concentration on a future. And I think those are the words that really stick out to me when we think about narrative, is like we have to stay so concentrated and immovable in them.
I mean, my reaction was Laura just pulled together a whole bunch of very diffuse and divergent bodies of kind of research and knowledge about narrative. So my reaction was like what she said. I don't know if I have a lot to add to it, but I guess two things that really stood out to me are this idea that narratives are rewarding. They are entertainment. We love to receive them and pass them, but really the strategic importance of narrative is what Laura said about the way that they shape how we think, how we feel, and what we're willing to do as a result. And the fact that we are embedded and in very much real-time narrative contests. There have been narratives that have been woven and told for a long time that work against the issues that we are all trying to advance in this room. And that is kind of overwhelming, but it's also the call to action. The only way to crack a narrative is with narrative. And so being able to have the infrastructure, the power, the commitment to advancing alternative narratives that outcompete, that stand up against those that are being told to advance the status quo is, to me, what it's all about.
Yeah, thank you all. I want to just add, I guess, an appreciation too about what resonated with me. I loved the technical teaching definitions to what Nat just shared. Really, there was such a broad range of learning. And then I wrote down, imagination is a discipline of freedom, because it made me think about how, to Nat's point about competing narratives, some narratives are actually meant to kill, assassinate our imagination. And so it's so important that that is really the birth of whatever we are dreaming about for the future. And Nat, given that you just sort of reminded us of the sort of vastness of thinking about narrative change and all of its technical pieces, can you share with us the work that Frameworks has done, and particularly some of the key messaging research you've done on OY, and then because this came up yesterday in your session, some alignment potentially in the movement around key messaging for our opportunity youth?
Sure, and I'll just take a quick step back and tell you about the three concepts that I've worked on for the last 25 years that I've been doing mindset research. And so the first is mindsets, kind of the deep underlying assumptions, understandings that we use to make sense of social issues, whether that's individualism or otherism or fatalism or collectivism or pragmatism. So those mindsets are really what determine what we see, as Laura said, what we see as nonsense, what doesn't make sense, and what we see as common sense. That's kind of the background on the Overton window and kind of why shifting it is so important. The second concept we work on is frames and framing, kind of the decisions that we make all the time, big and small, in the way that we say what we have to say, the values that we choose, the metaphors that we advance, the pronouns that we use, whether we talk about them, they, those people over there, or we and our, and how those frames activate mindsets and determine and shape how we think, feel, and act. And then really importantly, narrative as these big story patterns and packages that carry frames and have the ability to influence mindsets. And so the theory that kind of is behind our work, and I feel like I'm repeating what Laura said, but hopefully maybe in a slightly different way, is that narrative is this really powerful glue that can stick together these three arms of social change. So people who work on policy advocacy, people who work on organizing and power building, and people who work on the cultural strategy work that Laura talked about. Narrative can play this incredibly powerful piece in bringing those three arms or levers for change together. Narratives are advanced or are given birth by the stories that we tell and the framing choices that we make. And the idea, or the reason why I am so kind of passionate and convinced in the power of narrative and story, is that through those choices, we have the ability to shape how people think, what people expect, the norms that people have, and changing those norms and expectations is really what is really the work that I'm committed to doing and being part of, and which we've done on Opportunity Youth for almost a decade now. And I think it's important to say that there are some stories out there, particularly stories of threat and danger associated with young people, that directly block and impede our work. So that's like the dark cloud that hangs over my head. But the silver lining is the work that's been done, that is being done by folks in this room and outside of this room, whether it's people in Louisiana or Los Angeles, Hilton grantees or NYUC folks, to stand up and advance a very different story. So one that focuses on opportunity and the power of connection and the importance of young people being able to plug into systems that provide opportunities that every young person needs, but that not all have the opportunity to receive, of the power of changing systems and the important call of kind of collective power and solidarity in making that change. And there are lots of folks who are advancing that narrative, and I think the call to action is, how do we get more folks kind of coming together around that narrative? How do we put it in surround sound so that no matter where you are inundated, you are flooded by this narrative rather than the one we are opposing? And how do you put that on repeat over time?
A narrative constellation. Thank you for that. So for the purposes of thinking about the long-term learning arc that we're going to be on as a network, I just want to pull out just a few threads quickly. So Nat, the three sort of like harmful ways that we think about this now: individualism, you said, fatalism. What was the third?
Otherism.
Otherism, right. Okay, and then you talked about, and Laura also set this up so elegantly and beautifully, that as we're thinking about what our work is under narrative change, really thinking about these three parts: policy and advocacy, community power building, and the cultural strategy work. And so also as we're thinking about our own arc, just want to think about how we're organizing across those three domains. And then finally, because this is the North Star that we're going to work across our network to set for the movement, is you see some emergence and alignment around messaging specific to opportunity and connection. And that being both expansive enough that it can help us tell many different stories, so to speak, under that broader message around opportunity and connection for young people. Is that fair?
Yes, what you said. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
You got it.
Because as we continue our work, y'all, and I opened with this, thinking about how we build the capacity of our communities, the one thing that is really important is that the field lands on a narrative, a story that is expansive enough that it holds the vision for the kind of work that we need to do. But the particularity of each place needs to be able to make its own meaning of that story. So it needs to be big enough to hold the universality of our network while holding also the particularity of each place. And I love hearing that there's some now alignment around this opportunity and connection message. So thank you for your work. So now we're going to the expert on narrative change, and specifically to the conversation that Laura and Nat are having with us this morning, the relationship specifically between policy and advocacy. I want to bring Eugene's voice into this conversation. And Eugene, I'm curious for you to tell us not just about the work you're doing at T-Noise, but specifically connect the dots between the policies you're working on and the relationship with narrative change.
So this past year, and I had a chance to work with Community Foundation of Texas for a backbone project, and I was the only youth in there, and so I had the opportunity to go in there and actually read the proposals and stuff like that and see what I can put my input in, especially as a young adult in that room. And I think the narrative for me is just like having that aspect of just telling my story of what could be or could happen, especially for the DFW area. So I think that was a really important thing for me to be a part of, and I had a great time, especially talking to all the adults in the room as well, getting feedback and giving them feedback as well. So that was really important for me. And also currently right now, we're dealing with a state network with Mike, Hannah, Audrey, and Yelena. I'm part of that too. So as a youth, I get to see what's going on, especially around different states, their policy work, and see like how we can go forward for opportunity youth in general. And I think it's really important for me to be in there as well, because I can see what's going on around different states and see what they're doing and how we can translate and switch and pass around to different states and how we can win in this, especially this whole narrative that's going around with this, what I'm talking about, the situation. So so these two policies that I've been in and been working on is really important to me, because and how that ties in for me as a youth advocate. It helps. Again, we're humans. We love telling stories. The narratives. That's how we basically became human, basically, in that sense. So it's really important to have that aspect of storytelling and narrative, so we can all see what we can potentially go in the future and what we can lead and go forward with. So that's the.
Thank you. Yeah, show them some love. Show them some love. And I will say this, for those of you who may not be familiar, that our beloved colleague, Dr. Hannah Gorgie, leads the Texas Opportunity Youth Network. And I'm just going to ask you, if you're from Texas, make some noise, please. Not only is Texas so well represented, but to the point that Eugene just made, the power of the Texas network is the opportunity to get really, really clear about state policy objectives, specifically to improve youth outcomes, and then all of the coordination work they're able to do to really be able to, that Overton window that Laura was talking about, to really use those very specific moments to drive the kind of policy objectives that are critical to improving outcomes for youth across the state. And then Eugene is one of many young adults working to really not only, organize the narratives of their peers, but that cultural power piece, particularly rooted in youth voice. Eugene is one of many young people who are part of helping the state of Texas really leverage that and its policy change agenda. So thank you for helping us to connect some of those dots, Eugene. Yeah. So Madison, I'm so excited to come to you. But here's the context that I want to set for Madison being here with us today. I recently was in a meeting, and I heard someone tell this story. The story is about a Black Panther, a former Black Panther. Her name is Erica Huggins from Oakland. And this was like an interview that Erica Huggins was doing. And the question that this former Black Panther got asked was, if you could go back and do any of the things that the Black Panthers achieved over again, is there anything that you would do differently? And the answer this Black woman gave was, we were so deeply committed to taking care of the children. That drove us. That lived at the heart of what we were doing day after day. And we had a vision to transform the community. And so we were so deeply invested. I mean, if you know the history of the Black Panthers, they were doing education, they were doing food drives, they were doing clothing drives. I mean, really the sort of broader needs of community. She said the thing that we did not do in our efforts to take care of the children and our efforts to take care of the community was we did not take care of ourselves and each other. And so many of my peers are deceased. And if I could go back again in time, the thing that I would do is be very clear. We're gonna take care of the children and we're gonna take care of the community, but first and foremost, we're gonna take care of ourselves. So here's the thing that I wanna say about the narrative work. I opened with Brian Stevenson saying, this goes back to the Civil War. These narratives go back to the Civil War. Nat just reminded us there is literally a narrative battle happening right now. So what we must hold in this work is the idea that there is an emotional weight, an emotional burden to doing this work. And we can get very clear, y'all, about our technical strategies, how we need to organize. We can talk about cultural power all day long. But if we are not clear that there is a cost that comes with doing this work, that does build on our ancestors, and it does build on our elders, and it is for our descendants, then we cannot remain well long-term, and our wellness is just as important to the movement as our policy and advocacy agenda. This is why it was so important to have Madison here with us today. Because yes, she's a storyteller, yes, she does narrative work, but as I noted in introducing her, she's also somebody who does grief work, which is healing work, because what she's clear about is that grief is in relationship to loss, and loss is rooted in what we love. And we know we love young people thriving and communities thriving, right? So just know that that's the context with which I'm inviting Madison into this conversation, and specifically Madison, what I'm hoping you can do for us is speak to the relationship between narrative, grief, loss, and healing, and our individual and collective well-being, centering that in this work.
Thank you, Monique. So, yeah, if there is grief in our work, then there's love in our work. And if there's love in our work, then there's possibility in our grief. And that is especially true when we come together in community and hold that grief in community. But that can only be done if we bring that grief along with us. And so in this way, when we come together with our love of the work and our inevitable then grief in the work, is we join in community and hold it together, and can see that our grief is showing us the world that we want to be possible, because we would not be grieving if we thought things were great. And so it's a roadmap for us, and that roadmap is our own, it is each other's, and it also comes from our ancestors and our descendants. And so I think that's really important when we think about, when you ask about the long-term effects of this work and what it can take on us. I think about these harmful narratives that we meet as like these sediments that kind of can weigh into our body and and cloud our vision. And if you'll imagine with me, or there's many in the room, a vessel of water, and if those sediments are in that water, it would be really challenging and taxing to try to piece by piece take out the sediments, right? That'd be really challenging. And that's important work, right? It's important work to clear the waters, but another way to do that is to flood the narrative with true, rooted, and grounded stories, stories of dignity, stories of our true communities. And when we do that, and Nat used the word flood as well, when we pour into that vessel with that clear water of the true stories of our communities, we get that clear water back, and we see clearly, and we move clearly. And the best example I have of this is my grandmother, Esther Burnett Horn, who loves to be brought into a room, so I'm glad to bring her into this one. And she was taken from her reservation, our reservation, and put in a residential school, as were many Indigenous youth. And she, as a badass, she stayed and taught in those schools, and she really taught her students in a place that had, the logo and the mandate to kill the Indian and save the man. She stayed and taught Indigenous youth to the privilege and the honor and the responsibility of our lineage and of being in an Indigenous body. And in doing that, she put this protective layer. She sort of flooded that narrative and flooded that reality and protected her students, who then went out into a world that is intensely unkind to Indigenous people. But they had that protective layer. And when we have that protective layer, when we have those individuals and we have each other and we pour literally into each other to get that clear water, to get that clear vision back, I know we're not supposed to use the Aspen story anymore, but it becomes like the Aspens. If our love and our work is a flood, it's also a beacon. Then we find each other in it and we protect each other in it, and we see the others, and then we know, okay, we're going together, and we have that concentration and that devotion really to the work. And we wouldn't have it if we didn't love it, and we wouldn't have it if we weren't held by our grief in it, and if we didn't see our grief as a possibility of alchemy and really a portal to like what's possible as our roadmap. And so I think that it can be really tempting to sort of look away from our grief or think of it as too heavy, but when we turn toward it and like sort of hold its hand and take it along with us, we are able to swim in those clearer waters all together, but we have to find each other in doing that.
I have to say, this isn't to champion grief, it is to name it as something that is present. And it feels like it could potentially be a tension or a contradiction in its work. And so trying to think through how can we use it more productively and find its like purest essence with how it lives truly in harmony with love in ways that can inspire us across generations. So I'm gonna come to the audience now because we wanna hear from you all. And here's the question I want you to begin thinking of, and they're going to actually put something on the screen so you all can actually really engage with us. And it's the question about new narratives. What new narratives do we need now in the OY movement? But as they're setting all of that up, I'm wondering, now that we've heard from each of the panelists, like Laura, what's sitting with you? Nat started writing some things. So as they're pulling all of that up, I just want to invite you all to be in dialogue with each other now that we've each brought our voice into the conversation. What's sitting with you all? And y'all can feel free to go ahead and do the QR code and this stuff will start coming up while they are in dialogue. Go ahead, Nat, kick us off. You were writing.
Okay. I have so many thoughts on what you just said. I love that, Madison. That was great. I particularly love metaphors. So this idea of narrative, of flooding narratives, I think is really powerful. And not to get too political or conspiratorial, but we've been flooded by a narrative of individualism, otherism, and fatalism for the last 40 or 50 years in a very calculated way. And I'd love to be part of a flood that goes in the other direction, right? That advances ideas of collectivism, of what surrounds us, shapes us thinking, of pragmatism. So I think this kind of metaphor of a flood, a narrative flood, is actually really helpful in terms of thinking about strategy. What does it take? Who needs to be part of creating, not only creating, but sustaining that flood over time is really the kind of question that I'm sitting with right now. And then, the other thing that I'm sitting with is we've been talking a lot about narrative. I'm an anthropologist by training. I've done mindset work in 12 different countries over the course of my career. Every country has mindsets. Every country also thinks in narrative. So narrative is one of these few human universals, right? We have been evolved. Our psychology is evolved, has been evolved to think in narrative. That's how we hear and process information. That's how we remember. That's how we feel. That's how we communicate and transmit information. And so if we are not using that to think about advancing our goals and achieving the kind of world that we want to achieve, we are missing out on an incredibly powerful feature of human culture and cognition.
Thank you. Thank you. That was beautiful. Laura, Eugene, anything sitting with either of you?
I think Madison, thank you. So I'm sitting here thinking about grief, and I'm thinking about, for myself, just in full candor, you know, I'm grieving not only for myself, for so many people that I love, but I also know that there are some things that I'm gonna have to grieve to be able to move forward from this moment, because I'm mad. I am big mad, right? And I'm gonna be big mad. And I said I believe people can change, right? And so I'm gonna have to allow a lot of people and myself to be different tomorrow than we are today, because I believe in the world that we are working towards. And so I was just struck by that. I was thinking, oh, I'm gonna have to get my grief practice together. But I'm not, you know, like, I just wanna hold that too, that like, there's this space in this moment that like, if people are gonna change, I'm gonna have to allow them and support them in that too. And I'm gonna have to grieve some part of that.
That's so real. Thank you.
Yeah, the grief aspect. I mean, just growing up for a generation, like, you're just taught to be hard, like, you can't cry, can't feel sorry for nothing, just move forward. And for me, that's an important aspect for me. As I got older, you start to learn, like, it's okay to, you know, have grief. Like, recently, my grandma passed away, actually, and, like, it's hard for me to cry because I was just raised that way. And, like, you know, and that was just back when I went to Ghana, you know, to go bury her. And, like, after that happened, I just, like, I cried. I just, you know, for the first time in the longest time. Because she was the one telling me, you can't cry, you can't cry. So I was just, like, trying to, like, just gather the thoughts of what you're trying to say, but I saw her body, and I just broke down. And for me, I think the grief aspect is so important because it helped me moving on, because she was 99 years old. Like, she had kind of had to go in a way, you know. But I'm just glad, like, I got to see how, like, she lived in her story and how she taught me, because she helped raise me as well. And, like, you know, just like, now I feel great that she lived her life and she's somewhere in a better place. But it really got to me, okay, wow, this is something that you need actually to move on. So it's really important. I'm glad you brought this up and you're an expert on this. So thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you for that, Eugene. That was beautiful. That was beautiful. And thank you to the audience for participating in our conversation and helping us to identify collectively as a field some of the new narratives to counter a lot of what we've been talking about. And Nat and Laura are helping us to understand. And I am so curious as I look at my panelists, what's coming up on the screen. Youth are our future, agency, power, heal. At the center, creativity, humanity, power, solidarity. I'm wondering what's resonating with you. I'm wondering maybe what's missing. And I'm wondering, yeah, if you have any dots to connect between the conversation we've been having and some of the feedback the audience is giving us in regard to new narratives.
I'm watching abundance bounce around the screen. And the narrative around abundance is really giving me a lot of hope right now, that there can be everything for everyone and is enough on our abundant and giving planet. And, you know, our planet brought us here, we belong here. And so how do we share that abundance and partake in that abundance? And I think to the point of the flood, a flood is an abundance of stories, right? An abundance narrative. And also, you know, when we think of the longevity in our work and staying in it for the long term, we need a balance of that interrupting and taking down harmful narratives while also, you know, coming together and creating that flood of the true rooted narratives. And that's an abundance narrative to me, and that's the essence of that. So thank you all who brought abundance into the space.
Well, creativity is one that spoke up with me that I see. It's really important that we are creative in how we move forward in a lot of things, especially when it comes to like life or just opportunity youth in general, because I feel like the other narratives are trying to stop our creativity in that aspect. So it's really important to come with different ideas, ways to move forward, and just create different solutions in the creativity standpoint. So.
The one that I'm struck by is divine justice. So a lot of times in my narrative work, I remind folks that we are trying to evoke core emotions, right? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? What does it taste like? Anyone who's, I was lucky enough to spend time with over the past couple of days, I talked about that a great deal. And so something struck me about divine justice. What does divine justice smell like? What does it feel like, right? And how do we tell stories in a constellation that builds that when people hear us talking about opportunity youth, the future of opportunity youth, people are like, oh, I felt that divine justice, right? So that one really struck me.
First of all, it's bouncing around a little too fast for me. I'm in a little trouble. I'm a little dizzy up here. But so we're, as part of a project we've been running for the last 5 years, we've been testing out different values to see what kind of frames can channel people's dissatisfaction with what's going on in the country right now, of which there is broad dissatisfaction. And one of the values that we're finding to be the most powerful is this idea of kind of collective power and solidarity. And I see a lot of that on there, kind of collective power, solidarity aimed at the future. And I think in that is kind of the root of a narrative that can be advanced. And I don't just mean among people who kind of believe the things that we believe in this room. So that value is resonant and powerful with people across the political spectrum, with people of different racial and ethnic backgrounds. And so I see a lot of that on here. And I think in some way that's an antidote to this growing sense that, the system is rigged and we can't do anything about it. That we need to have a counter narrative to that focuses on the ability to come together, to unrig those systems, to advance the kind of outcomes that we all care about, justice, equity, belonging, and a different future for the country. So I see a lot of that. I took some creative license there, but a lot of that is there. This power, agency, solidarity, those are the things that really stand out to me.
I love that. I love that. And Laura, I want to thank you for bringing divine into this conversation because that is sitting with me. I am thinking a lot and talking a lot about how what's moving me the most in this work is the idea that at the real heart of this in my mind is that every single human has a divine light in them. And we, again, can get very technical in our strategies and in our solutions. But at the end of the day, how do we just hold as our sort of like most basic way that we want to show up as a human, that we just want to honor the light that every single person has. And I say that to say, and Dr. Sean Jenwright, Dr. G, I see you in the house. He's going to remind us later that this is spiritual work, y'all. This is spiritual work that we're doing. Again, we need to get organized around what are those solutions? How do we change our policies? How do we get to a democracy that works for all of us? And at the most basic human level, there's this question of, and how do we just honor the light that every single person has at the core of how we think about getting to a transformative future. And I say that to say not just thank you to what each of the panelists have brought, but thank you to all of you for participating in helping us to hold as expansively as possible the narratives that we need to keep in this work. So we are going to come to the audience for questions in a moment, but before we do that, I just have 2 final questions for our panelists. But I'm putting that out there so you all can be thinking about your questions before we come to the audience. And Nat, I want to come to you. So Nat did a design session yesterday on a lot of what he's been speaking to today, but it was an opportunity to go deeper in this, like from a technical perspective. And what I will say is that this question did actually come up yesterday, and we were like, oh, that's perfect. Actually, a few of what some of what we've been talking about already came up in this session. But what was asked very specifically and what we had planned for today is this idea that particularly right now, it feels like we are facing a false choice that we must, because everything is so present and everything is so consuming, even as like the flood, everything coming at us so quickly, it feels like we have to be immediately responsive. In some ways, a really sort of short-term reaction to thinking about our narrative work. And even the way the question was framed in the session yesterday was, but could there potentially be some long-term harm if we're not thinking strategically about the relationship between the short and the long term? And so, Nat, I'm wondering if you could just help us really think about that. Like, what are the tensions between short-term, long-term? Is that a false binary? And really, how should we be thinking about our narrative work, short, mid, and long-term?
Yeah, I mean, I have not had a conversation with anyone over the last 10 months that has not kind of been centrally about this question. So I have a lot to say, more than the 2 minutes that I can see on the timer right there. So I'll keep it really quick. So let me just be clear right from the beginning. Like, we are in short-term, we are facing some serious short-term problems, right? I'm not going to deny that. Stuff is on fire, right? The issues that I work on, public health, immigration, criminal legal reform, climate, like those issues and the people who work on them face some very real, very right now dilemmas. However, we've been conditioned to think about the now and the later from a versus perspective, right? We either make the decisions we need to now to save our democracy, to address youth mental health, to protect people in our country from being deported, or we focus our attention on the long term. And that's what I think is a false choice and a false binary. There's a ton of examples where very deliberately people are baited into making short-term decisions that disadvantage long-term movements, right? So when we're baited into talking about youth mental health as a crisis, we actually reinforce people's sense that there's nothing that can be done about it, and we put back our movement by decades every time we do that. Every time we're pushed to engage in immigration discussions by focusing on the one hardworking immigrant who made all the right decisions, we throw everybody else under the bus, and we define the conversation as one that's based in deservingness and set our movement back. There are ways of making these decisions, and this is why I think Laura's presentation is so powerful, because I think the answer, the way to align the short and the long term, is with a narrative and mindset perspective. If we can try to make those short-term decisions with an understanding and a sense of the mindsets that they activate and the effect of that activation on that Overton window over time, we hopefully can make better decisions in the short term that win the day, but also that advance the long-term success trajectory of a movement. And I actually think the Fight for 15 is like one of my, like such a good example of that. So the architects behind that movement were very careful in terms of understanding mindsets, and they avoided the deservingness argument. They avoided the sense that those people who work hard deserve something, and instead they focused on what the economic system can, should, and must do for the well-being of people. Now, that was a very wise long-term decision in terms of the movement, and they avoided kind of getting drawn into this deservingness, you know, only those who work really hard deserve to have well-being. So I'd love to talk to anybody else who's interested in this right here, right now, and down the line later. I think it is like the discussion that we need to be having and thinking about, as so many of us are drawn into very near-term defensive decisions, and how we can think about making those in the best long-term strategic way.
Laura, you were nodding the whole time. Yeah, the snaps, the claps, I love it. Did you want to add?
I think I would add too that while I was at PolicyLink, we did a set of metaphor elicitation. I'll nerd out with anybody who wants to get into it later, but all the nerdy parts of narrative, I'm here for them. But ultimately it goes to this kind of false choice. And so we asked folks, like, you know, what do we need to do in this moment? And the choices were either burn it all down or keep everything as it is. And people were paralyzed on both sides of it. People were like, well, if I burn it all down, how do I make sure we don't recreate the exact same thing? And other people were like, well, if we keep it as is, I hate it as it is. This ain't, you know. So, but the research showed us that part of what was really important was this aspirational future, but taking people on the journey with you, right? What were the steps you had to take? And there's some of us that are gonna be like, I know exactly needs it to happen, right? And then there's gonna be other of us who are like, Eugene, I'm gonna need you to inspire me, and I'm gonna go with you, right? And so the question then becomes for me as we tell stories, both for the short immediately, that we don't fall into deservedness is my, ooh, I'll get on my soapbox later. I hate deservedness.
Do it, Laura, do it.
Right, right. So, but it is about how do we take people on the journey with us? How do we tell stories that folks can see that, you know what, maybe the in-between is we do a controlled burn, right? So we enrich the soil and we grow something different, right? So I think a lot about that. And the other point is like, I'm no nonsense. On November 1st, there are gonna be folks who are not gonna be able to feed themselves. And two, I hold the complexity that I don't want us to fold at the government level, right? It's the complexity we hold in all of our work every day, right? Those are mine for right now. And I refuse to believe, because I've got examples, that's got research, I got Madison, I got Monique, I got Eugene. This is a false choice. I know that we can do different, right? So that's when I wake up and I tell myself every day, good, bad, ugly, and in between. I'm like, well, we gonna know how to do this, right? And so I encourage you to think about like, we aren't just making decisions for now, we're making them for the long term, and we can do both. We can do both. We have examples of that.
Eugene, Madison, anything before we move on?
I don't really have nothing to add on, but that was powerful. So I can say for sure.
Yeah, and that we, not only do we have examples of it, we have like a mandate from generations before and after to do it. It's our, it's in our DNA, it's in our bones to imagine in this way and carry on a legacy of creativity that brought us here. And so it's not only the way forward, it's the only way forward for us.
Ancestral intelligence, y'all. All right, now I'm looking at the audience. Any questions? We have a mic runner. Do we have a mic runner? Oh, there you go. Right here in the middle of the room.
Kind of looking at these uncertain times and the use of outright lies, stories, and pulling from these negative narratives. Once we get past this moment in time, how do we rebuild a collective truth? And how can we use narratives to try to get to that point? Because no one believes anything. Because the stories that have been told, the lies that have been told have been so much, so fast, so often, that by the time we are building a narrative to fight against the lie, there are 7 more that have popped up. And so how do we move forward in this?
I said all hard questions go to Nat, so this is definitely for him.
Next question, please. I don't know. I mean, you go ahead.
Well, I think lies wear us down over time, right? Like, you know you've been lied. And so actually all of the misinformation, I think, lays the ground for a deep craving for truth and a deep ability to clock truth when it's there. And so I think if anything, we're being done a really unfortunate favor. We're being done a favor in an unfortunate way of seeking truth is going to be, that we're going to be so hungry for it as a collective.
Yeah, I definitely agree, because like, how much lies can a person take? You know, so I think, as you said, like, it's really important that it's gonna wear down, and it's up to the person or the community in general or coalition to go seek the truth and actually collaborate together to see this the straight truth for this. So that's my opinion on that.
I mean, I'll just. Oh, Laura, you go. I'm sorry.
I try to throw you under the bus and then I cut you off. It's not right. Sorry about that. So there's a couple things I would say. And there's a flood, right? So the world is looking for truth speakers, right? And that's people who stand up, right? We are looking for those folks in some ways desperately, right? And I'm not saying the odds aren't against us, but the more silent we are, right? And as we become truth tellers, we're also building trust. People need people that they can trust. The other thing is entering into conversations with dignity, right? Be consistent in it. And the other thing is, I talked about narrative resilience. Like, there's a great deal of pre-bunking that we can do as well. That's what I would put out there as part of it.
I'll just add something really specific that we shouldn't do. which is repeat the thing that we want people to forget. That's really easy to say, that's really hard to do. But the least effective thing we can do is repeat those ideas we're trying to refute, and in so doing, give them more air and strength and breath. And it's really hard to do when you're up against misinformation and lies that are deliberately being woven and sewn into our discourse. But the thing that we must do is advance and repeat the things we want people to believe. The single best predictor of what people believe is not how true it is how many times they've heard it.
We have hands in the middle of the room. Oh, and in the front and by the window. Can we?
I think you were. Oops,
Yeah,
sorry.
well, let's take these two questions here.
Okay.
Yeah, no, you go. Keep the mic.
Okay. This is related to the first question and Nat's last response there, and more so deeper into the effects of the lies and not just the lie itself. And I'm talking more specifically for young Black women. The narrative that we have of, there's a lot of them, but just the basic ones of being lazy, or you can be nothing but a teen mom, not good for nothing, laying on your back, those type of things. Once you recognize that, okay, I've been fed this false narrative, I've been fed this thing that is supposed to deteriorate my imagination, my strength, my resilience. Once you realize that, and there's a level of having to heal from, I guess, feeling stupid about believing that. Like, how was I tricked? How was I duped? Am I inferior people? So more related to that, I'm just wondering, like, what are some actual practices that can center healing from the narrative that we were told once we have found one that fits more with us and our future goals?
Janisha, before they answer, I just want to say thank you. That is why Madison is here. The harm is real and it lives in our bodies across generations. So it's not just that we need to, again, have these technical solutions for the work. We have to be doing the healing internally in ourselves as we also do this work. Thank you for that beautiful and necessary question.
Yeah, and we have to grieve it. And we have to make space for that grief and then ask that grief what it wants us to know. And that grief wants you to know that the depth of that you're feeling it is the depth of how untrue all of that was. And so sitting with it and allowing it and having that time to then see, with that energy release, with that energy change, what then becomes possible? Like, how does that then become a portal to, because if the grief has pulled you this far into a lie, like how far can it propel you into the truth as well, now that you know it? And so it's just taking the time to sit with it and, in support, in community, and say these things out loud. And I hosted a group for a while called Grief and Cake, where we just sat and processed grief in community and had cake. Very simple format that literally anyone could do. And it was some really powerful healing, right? Because we're all doing it together. We're saying these things out loud. We're getting them out of our bodies. And then we're saying, all right, now with all this freedom, what's possible? Yeah.
Thank you. And before I even pass it, just very quickly, Nat, I was really kind of asking to that last tidbit that you said of not repeating the same thing. Where is the balance between completely forgetting what had happened, the narrative that was there, and not repeating? Because I do feel that there is some harm of just completely forgetting about the history and the trauma that came in the process of moving forward. But I do see the harm of constantly reminding of that too. So, like, where's the balance?
Yeah, so just two things really quick. Call out to a group called the Wellbeing Project. I don't know if anyone has ever heard of the Wellbeing. You guys are connected. So this is a group that their one and only purpose is to support people who are doing social change and are challenged by engaging in tough issues to have support around well-being. It's an international group. There are lots of ways to connect to that group. I am such a big fan of their work and would encourage you to check that out. So I think, part of, Laura talked about pre-bunking. So that's a strategy, a misinformation correction strategy where we try to advance a story proactively such that when people are exposed to misinformation, that misinformation has less of an effect. But one other thing that's been shown to be really powerful in misinformation correction is in alerting people to the fact that they have been fed false information, and to normalize the way that that has affected people, so that people don't feel alone in the fact that they've been, I'm gonna be a little dramatic here, duped, but that this is a deliberate, manipulative practice that has been and is affecting lots of people. So that, that kind of acknowledgement and that kind of calling out to the deliberateness of the tactic is actually a strategy that has been shown to make people resistant to misinformation. And I think there's, I'm not directly answering your question, but some of that is in there. But of course, I don't think we can, I mean, this is why doing this narrative work is so hard, is that we have to engage with these toxic narratives. We cannot do this work and pretend that those don't exist. And I think that's one reason why being engaged in this work is so difficult, is so taxing on our well-being. Yeah.
So we have 2 minutes left. What I wanted to do was make sure we got at least 1 or 2 other questions in a room, but you're gonna have 30 seconds only to share your question. And then Laura, I wanna start with you with that response, and then we'll close out with panelists. So can we get the microphone to Adam, the other question we had here? Okay. Sorry, thank you, Jamie.
Thank you, Adam. I moved away from my data manager before I asked this question. So I feel like a lot of the partners that we work with right now just value numbers over the youth voicing what they need. And it's so hard for me to look at a number and value it over the relationships, the burdens, and the successes that I see from these youth every day. Do you have any nuances of how you use data in your narratives to strengthen it? I know it doesn't have to be like one versus the other, but I'm just wondering, like, how do you go about using it?
That's great, thank you. And we have one more question behind him, and then we'll close out with responses.
Good morning, everybody. Okay, so I'm 24. I'm part of the youth community, and it's kind of hard for me because I come from struggles and, you know, traumas and all that, but I'm using that as fuel to fuel my fire, to keep going, to keep pushing. And what stories do y'all see or hear, you know, throughout, you know, just traveling all over the world, you know, how can it change somebody's narrative, and how can you keep them going in times of trouble? I feel like that we could push that more in school systems, because they don't have that nowadays. You know, it's just basic you know, English, math, science, social studies, and we don't have the classes that teach us, you know, life after, you know, school, or, you know, if we don't continue on to college or, you know, a higher education. Like me, you know, I went through Cafe Reconcile. I'm still going through Cafe Reconcile, which I love this program in all my heart. So they really changed my life to see it from a different perspective, and not just, you know, just downgrade myself into something that I don't want to be in, that the world wants to see me as, because I'm a young black man first. Yeah. So just being me as my own person, and not, you know, falling down to the statistical groups of, you know, just my color, of my race. So how do y'all tell or just push another young person in the world to keep the negatives out, you know, to keep pushing, just keep going?
Thank you. And there's a beautiful synergy between your questions. Laura, did you want to start us off?
I just wanted to say for as a black woman, for other black people who are in this room, ground ourselves in our own black gaze, right? The true telling of our history. For folks who need Cole Arthur Riley, Tricia Hersey, I could name off folks, right? So lean into the Black Afrofuturist movement that is making sure that we know our own history and know our own strengths and telling our own stories, right? That is part of the grieving, that is part of the healing, that's part of the stories we need to tell. So I had to say that.
Thank you. Eugene?
To answer your question, what I can say is it's okay to mess up, you know. Like for me, I wake up, every day is a new world for me. Like it's a whole different world every day for me. Every time I wake up, it's a new challenge, it's a new world I create. So just keep on going forward, honestly, and also just like finding people like in your peer group to be vulnerable. Because I know as a young Black man, it's hard to be vulnerable growing up. You know, it really is. Just growing up with different aspects of life and stuff like that. But we're human, you know what I'm saying? So like that's the emotion we create naturally. So I think it's really important, you know, just to make sure like your world never ends. It keeps on going every day, you know, as it goes. So that's what I believe in too. And you should take that forward and pass it on to the students as well, you know.
Show them some love. I heard some claps. Show them some love. These two young Black men affirming each other in this space. Let's name it and celebrate it. Yes, thank you. Okay, Madison.
Yeah, I think, you know, stories are most powerful, you know, to the data question too, you know, data and numbers don't really give us goosebumps or bring us to tears, but stories do, and stories are data in many ways. So I think seeking out those stories that are affirming to the identities you hold and who you are, and then also using those stories and the stories of your community through deep listening to inform the strategies that you create is data in and of itself, and there's ways to pull numbers from story and things like that and get really creative about how to create strategy from that wisdom.
Bring us home, Nat.
Oh, I don't know if I have a lot to add to that. That was really, I didn't get your name, but I love what you had to say. And I guess what stood out to me and what you said was just the motivating power of agency, of having control and being able to address the issues and the situations that matter to you, and how motivating that is. And then from the other hand, how unmotivating it is when that is denied and people don't have that sense of agency. So I'm really interested in this concept of agency and power and what that can do, and how narratives can extend and grant that to groups of people or deny it. So that really, what you had to say really kind of stood out and stuck with me, so I appreciate that.
And I'm going to close us with this very brief reflection that is also an answer to you and also to Miss Janisha, which is to share. You can actually find this New York Times article. They did this research for young people and how they fared after 9/11. So young people who were there in the throes of it. And then, you know, more than a decade later, tracking their sense of resiliency, their sense of agency, their sense of well-being. And what they found was that the young people who fared the best were the young people who understood their history. And not just understood their history, but understood the complexity of their history. They could tell you the story of their uncle who went to jail and their grandmother who started a business. They could tell you the story of the bank that helped Black families buy homes for the first time in the stores where people of color could not shop until whatever year. And that those were the people who, in the face of the kind of restrictions you're speaking to, the kinds of what you needed to navigate that I've had to navigate in my own life as well, that was what the predictor of resilience, agency, and well-being was for over time. I say that to say narratives matter, stories matter, and we know that that's really what history is. It's the retelling of the narratives and the stories. So we feel particularly grateful that we are the story makers and we get to stand on the shoulders of our ancestors and elders who made the story making work possible. Please join me in thanking this panelist. And look, y'all, we went a little bit over, but that's all right. That's all right. Everybody knows I like to stay on time, but we want to encourage you all to go ahead into your breakouts and remind you that we'll be back here at 1:30 for our closing plenary. Thank you all.